Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. So if you had a story about being a good man and that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd actually listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr Ray Swann, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys in the modern world. The series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. In today's podcast, we speak with James Kerr. James is a best-selling author, motivational speaker and business consultant who specialises in demonstrating the benefits of change and developing high-performance cultures. He's the author of a book called Legacy, which examined leaderships and the secrets to success. It was based on his observations of the world's most successful sporting team ever, the New Zealand All Blacks national rugby team. James is a natural storyteller whose messages emphasise individual accountability, integrity and genuine humility. Well, welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast, James. It's great to have you here. Welcome.
Great, it's great to be here, Ray. Thanks for having me.
One of the things we were just chatting about just off mic was the, just the difficulty it is for young men these days in growing up in the world in which we live, and we're talking about a number of the challenges, whether it be social media, men behaving badly in general, how that's fed back, and some of the other people that we've spoken to on this podcast have talked a lot about their heroes and how important it is to find messages or positive examples of men behaving well. As we were just chatting about it, what are some of your thoughts around boys in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think I'm not sure it's ever been easy to be a boy. I'm not sure it's ever been easy to be a human being.
Yeah.
I think life is it's a journey of self-discovery, and we make mistakes, and we particularly make mistakes when the testosterone is flowing, when we don't know ourselves, in those areas, and that's, I think, probably compounded and accelerated and fragmented a lot. Social media has made massive social sort of changes. There's now huge small pockets of cultural kind of or countercultural meaning, and some pretty bad examples out there. We talked about at a presidential level, the failure of integrity perhaps, and leadership around the place. It's not exactly always modelling what a great man looks like or a good man looks like. So I think that's very, very difficult. And there's been a general kind of fragmentation of society anyway. So the structures around meaning and the culture around nurturing young boys or boys and turning them to sort of strong and successful young men, I think is generally lacking, and clearly that falls to schools and to parenting to really set those standards and set those values and get those values into place, because they need to be embedded early, I think.
We'll talk more about values for sure. One of the things, having read your book a number of times now, and also heard you speak, and I remember you saying a couple of years ago now, and I might be putting you on notice here without letting you know, but you said to me once, the good guys win. And I love that. I mean, I loved it so much because to me it spoke of I think it is universal, where I think deep down we do know what is right as people, and it's sometimes about getting a lot of the other business out of the way and to help communities and people and young men in particular to actually just go with what is right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great quote again from sport. If you have discipline, you don't need rule. Most people know what's right. They really do, and clearly the trauma and the many factors can work against that, can conspire against that, but often the basic kind of golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, is reasonably ornate. That sense of fairness. There have been psychological studies with chimpanzees. One of them gets a good treat and the other one gets a bad treat, and that sense of fundamental unfairness on a primitive primate level, I think, probably comes into the human species as well. And yeah, the good guys win. What we need to build in life is a culture of sustained success. And a lot of the time, bad behaviours are a short-term solution to something. We'll steal instead of earn, for instance, or we'll take instead of create. But that's not usually sustainable. You get found out, the tide goes out, and you've got your pants down. So is setting up a strong foundation for the right behaviours, and it's not Boy Scout and goody good altruistically. It's really good because it's a good way to live. It is if we talk about the ancients, the core of it was virtue, a virtuous life, and a virtuous life wasn't a goody good life. It wasn't all about Boy Scouts and marshmallow. Really, it's about what are your sound, basic, fundamental values, and if you apply them to all of your decisions, you make good choices. And good choices last, and they lead to good relationships. And really, relationships are the basis of happiness, success, legacy in many ways. So,
and connection, I suppose.
And connection.
Yeah.
And connection. It's connection and trust, relating to people. Poor behaviours, poor choices, let's say, not in a judgmental sense, but just poor choices. They destroy trust. And if you destroy trust, you destroy relationships. If you destroy relationships, you destroy so much of your life. It's one of the core secrets of success, but it's a secret of happiness. It's a secret of longevity even. So creating and maintaining those connections requires a degree of, let's say in inverted commas, virtue.
One of the things we've talked a lot about in our own conversations has been about the power of story. What I'm interested, James, in we talk about the idealistic idea of the goodness as a virtue, having triumph, and deep down that we know, and that all boys know, have a sense of that. It strikes me that it's also important that boys hear the call, like this kind of calling. A rally cry, or a sense of a bigger purpose, not just to themselves. And I know a lot of the work that you've done, whether it's with Team Brighton or the All Blacks and so on, you've been able to identify how groups of people, whether it's at a family level or at a community level or sporting level, how they actually create that call that people can sort of stop, and they hear this sort of there's a line in a hymn, so now the trumpet calls in after years, and it's always, even as a kid when I heard that hymn, I just thought, wow, what a rings pealing in our ears was the line. What is that call, and how have you seen good organisations or even good families create that call for young men to be able to respond to?
I think that call is the answer to a fundamental desire, which is an answer to the question why does it matter, why does my life matter, why do I matter? The opposite of that, the vitality of that question of why is depression, is bleakness, is a lack of hope. We're quite goal-driven, particularly men, I think. We have a sense of, we want to achieve something, we want to have an impact. So purpose-driven organisations, if you have something to live for, you will. If you have something to play for, you genuinely will. Tend to outperform those who are just going through the motions. In terms of individuals, I think it's about identifying your gift and then giving that gift over. And that could be anything. It could be song and singing, it could be writing, it could be being a great mathematician and a great accountant. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's about engaging our innate talent, our innate gift, and gifting it on, kind of passing it on, I think. And if the Japanese talk about it as that combination of that Venn diagram between our talent, what the world needs, what the world will pay for, and what we love doing. And if we can find that sweet spot in that, and I think it was Mark Twain said, the trick of life is to turn your vocation into your vacation, to find that thing that doesn't feel like work. And I think at an individual level, when you get that sweet spot, you've kind of found your purpose for being here. Life isn't passing you by. You're driving it because you're doing what you're here on earth to do. And I think that's incredibly valuable as an individual, and equally as valuable within an organisation. Otherwise, why be here? Why sacrifice all the time and the effort and the energy that it takes to make a contribution to something that doesn't really matter, that seems to me to make no sense. But if you can engage in why this matters, life lights up, I think.
We were talking earlier about why values are important, leading a values-based life. It strikes me that in life, when the test comes, what you fall back on, whether you're conscious of them or not, typically are your values. So why not think a bit about them, what you stand for? And I think in your book, in Legacy, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was something around find a cause that you're prepared to die for.
Yeah. And
it sounds quite dramatic in a way, but in another way, I guess, without getting too philosophical about it, I guess in terms of your ego, sometimes when you have to change, it feels like you are dying. You're not literally dying, but what are you prepared to not give of yourself?
Yeah.
That when all is said and done, you go back to. So perhaps answering my own question here, but I'm interested in your thoughts actually about values.
Well, I think that's sort of have purpose. What are you prepared to die? If you think about your job, any job, you're giving at least 8 hours a day to it. Let's say a full-time job, and probably a lot more. You are giving your life to it, so you are sacrificing for it. You are prepared to die for it because your life's ticking away. And understanding your sense of urgency and the necessity to really live your life now, I think is tremendously powerful and motivating and engaging when you live on that particular edge. In terms of values, I think specifically in terms of values, values shape behaviours. As you say, we fall back on them, and we inherit a lot of values, from our parenting, from the society that's around us, from our schooling, from our friendship groups, all of that. But we also have a choice over what values we value. And, I would argue that the things that we value create value in many ways. If we come back to that kind of the virtue, if you value integrity, if you value creativity, if you value human connection, for instance, a 3-part value set, you'll tend to sort of live in that direction. They will inform your decisions and your choices incrementally, but you'll gain momentum in that area, and you put energy into those things. And if you put energy into integrity, you'll be seen as a safe pair of hands, a trusted confidant, all of the good stuff that comes from that. If you value creativity, you will be pulled towards entrepreneurship, self-expression, other creative people, other creative experiences. You'll create a future. If you're drawn to, and these are just examples, if you're drawn towards connection, and you really understand that, then you'll make an effort to meet more people, to really connect, to get under the skin of other human beings. Now, they're all fantastic outcomes from some fundamental decisions. I think one of the things with, we know about kind of neuroplasticity, and we self-talk and framing the conversation, is that we have a lot of choice over the story we tell ourselves. And a lot of the work that I do is around, well, let's go, who is it that we want to be? What are our values? What is our vision of the future? And what is our purpose? And if we can really actively engage in defining that, the life unobserved is the life hardly lived. If we observe our life and what we deeply value, and a vision that we have for ourselves that it might seem wildly unrealistic, and a purpose, what's the contribution that we're going to make here? We have the beginning of an ethos. We have the beginning of a sort of a way of living, a narrative that we live by, and if we internalize that, we won't even necessarily know that we're doing it. We do it anyway by default, but we get a chance to create and construct that. I write about how the story we tell ourselves turns out to be the story that others tell about us. We get to define that story, and that's really the basis of what the ancient Greeks called ethos, which is really character, or the characteristic spirit of an organization or an individual. And they saw it as two sides of a coin. On one side of the coin is character, who we are. On the other side of the coin is character, like a typewriter character, the mark we make on a blank sheet of paper, the impact that we have. And so, the story we tell ourselves turns out to be the impact we make in life. So, it better be a good story. it better be a good story, and our power to tell that story to ourselves and to those around us will tend to define the outcomes. So taking the time to understand first ourselves, our deeper values, to really look at where we're going and why it matters and how we tell it to ourselves and to others is I believe one of the most important decisions we can make about our life and about the way we live our life. And it falls into the important camp, but not necessarily the urgent camp. So we have to make it urgent. We have to make the important something that we really focus on and incorporate into our life, certainly at certain stages of our life, to really reflect and reinforce who we are and what we're here on earth to do, because goodness knows it's a fleeting time we have. It's a short life. Let's decide what life that will be.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about our parents, and I'm wondering, we talk about values, and we I think as adults can understand ideas around, creating your own story and I guess self-authoring, to use another language set. Do you have any thoughts or advice or ideas about how would you connect to some of the younger people, like some of the kids, around things like values, and how would you possibly go about explaining it, or even explaining the benefit of values to a younger person?
I think, if I was to talk about the All Blacks for a second, and one of the experiences that I had when I first walked into the All Blacks environment that surprised me was, and you have to imagine that there were thousands, Test day, they just won, they'd just beaten Wales, there were thousands of people still in the stadium, helicopters overhead, everyone wanting autographs and selfies and so on, the sponsors and all of that in the stadium. A really exciting time. The room was cleared out, there's a debrief, and then the players, somebody said, "Come on lads, it's time to go." And the players, rather than grabbing their bags and heading for the bus and going out and celebrating just how great they were, grabbed brooms, long-handled brooms, and started tidying up after themselves, sweeping the sheds. All of that mud and the blood and the strapping and doing it right. Now that's really kind of living values out loud. One of the core values within that environment is the idea of humility. Never be too big to do the stuff that needs to get done. Don't think you're so special, don't get ahead of yourself. Just because you're the world's number one, prepare like you're number two. And what I'd say to a 14-year-old is they don't do it because it's just good to do. They do it because it helps them win. It helps them be the people they want to become. It's not just about doing it for somebody else. It's not really about tidying up the sheds. It's really about just doing it right. There's a line from Buddha that I really like, that he says that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. Playing rugby, or taking care of your mates, or not bullying in the classroom, or whatever it is, that fundamental kind of value set will inform just about everything. So be the person you want to become, and really use it as a tool of self-understanding. I believe the older I get, there are two things that become true. I'm in my 50s now. Two things become true. One is that life is all about relationships, really is all about relationships. That I've been doing a project on the earthquake in Nepal in 2015, and the one lesson for the survivors is all that really mattered was the people they love. In the end, it's not the material thing, it's not my BMW is bigger than yours. It's really creating good relationships and loving the people you love and treating the people around you well. And the second part is really about self-knowledge. Life is about self-discovery. And my grandmother used to say it well, you never learn less. So making that an important part of life. Who are you? Genuinely, who are you? Not who do you want to look like on Instagram? Not, I wish I was part of that crew over there because their life looks really good on Facebook. But really what's true for you and what's right for you. And that might not be huge popularity in the playground. It might be 2 or 3 good mates. And that's good, and that's okay. It may be actually, I know, sport is really important in the school, but actually I'm quite good at the violin. And expressing that and being strong and true to yourself in that area, and that I think comes from a values base and self-knowledge and honesty and integrity with yourself. And integrity is a really interesting word. It's really about the integration, what I feel, what I think, what I say, and what I do as an integrated whole.
Getting them all lined up.
And getting them all lined up, and that sense of alignment and oneness is tremendously powerful, both in terms of the way you live in the world, but it's a peaceful state. You're not being literally torn apart trying to be something that you're not. So I would encourage any 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds, and I encourage I have an 8 and a 9-year-old, is really know thyself and be thyself. And I think that's a tremendously powerful, fundamental stance in life. Otherwise you'll be pulled in every direction. You'll live other people's lives and not your own. And you have a gift. Discover whatever that gift is, and then find ways to give it.
Beautiful. One of the things that we do, in fact, two of the things that we do on this podcast, because we ask these questions, and one of them is about what does it take to be a good man these days, and the other part is if you could tell a story to a boy and he'd listen, what would the story be? So I'm interested, James, in your thoughts, firstly around what does it take, what is it to be a good man these days?
I think we've been talking about some of these things. I think it's to be of good character, in fact, sort of thinking about it. And what does that mean? I think it begins with a sort of an understanding of self and the authenticity we've just been talking about. Being, if you have discipline, you don't need rules. Actually, if you have self-discipline, you don't need discipline. Who am I? What do I stand for? And having asked all of those questions and being true to yourself, and if you've asked those questions honestly, I think you are a person of good character, and I think the ripples go outwards. There's a tremendous concept, an African word from southern Africa, Ubuntu, and it means, it's difficult to translate, but it's the pebble in the pond, and the ripples go outwards, and you are that pebble, and the ripples will go outwards from you. So you're going to have an impact on the world just by being in it. We tend to underestimate the impact that we have on the world, but just by being in it, we change things, and we have an impact, particularly on the people around us. So doesn't it make sense to choose what impact that will be? To lead by example, to stand for something, and to own it, and to be have integrity, integration around that. And that can be anything, and if you're true to yourself and you're true to your deepest humanity, I believe and I experience, then good stuff happens. You stay true, you develop your talents, you develop your sense of self, you get strong boundaries, you don't get easily influenced. You're able to kind of carve your own path and beat to and march to the beat, as they say, of your own drummer. And I think in the end, as I sort of hit the halfway mark, let's say, I think that's more and more and more important, having a sense of independence and a sense of self, based on those strong values. The All Blacks say better people make better All Blacks, and I think it's a tremendous idea and a tremendous expression of that idea, that the better you are as a human being, of good character, of leadership, of contribution to those around you, of taking responsibility, of taking ownership, giving away credit when you win, taking blame when you lose. All those quite old-fashioned values are tremendously powerful ways of living, and they lead to a successful life. If you try to take the shortcut and just try to be successful for the sake of it, you'll get found out. But if you're doing it right, and you keep doing it right, whatever life throws at you, you will more than likely be able to prevail. And life's a marathon. It goes on for a long time. You don't want to burn your bridges. You want to do it right. And the more you do it right, the more you do one thing right, the more everything will go right. So I think that's probably certainly one way of looking at sort of authenticity, values-based, doing it right, will lead to the right results.
In terms of this story?
Well, I've already told the story I was going to tell. So the Sweep the Sheds, because I think it's a tremendous illustration of kind of living your values, finding ways to stay humble.
And it's surprising as well, isn't it? In a sense that, you know, in this culture where you would expect, you know, they're almost like deities in New Zealand, even across the world. Any elite sports person, you know, we look up to them, and we, you know, you would pay to be near them, to pick anything up, just to have. And
of course, that's a great risk for them, because it's very easy to have your head turned. You know, if you're on posters around the town, and if you're on television every week, and everybody knows your name, and as soon as you start to think you're special, you pretty soon turn out not to be. So I think the sweeping the sheds, you know, it's the answer to the oldest kind of question of them. You know, the problem of the all hubris. You know, they tell a story of Achilles. Achilles was dipped in the river and made to be impervious to all mortality. So he became arrogant, and he thought, no one can get me. He didn't bother with much armour. He could run into battle and be undefeated. But of course, his mother had held him by the heel and had left, because we all have moments and areas of vulnerability. And it was ignoring his area of vulnerability, deciding that he was God's gift to everything, that killed him, because he got shot in the heel, the Achilles heel, our weakness. And that's really a parable, or a metaphor, extended metaphor of the danger of ego. So that's another way of looking at the same story. You know, one more story, if I may. Dan Carter, one of the great All Blacks, one of the great rugby players, one of the great sportsmen of all time, highest scoring rugby player of all time. He told the story of when he became International Player of the Year. He starred against the Lions a decade or so ago, played what was called the Perfect 10, one of the great matches. International Player of the Year, superstar, poster boy, advertising Calvin Klein or jockeys or something on billboards with his washboard stomach, had everything. And one of the senior guys from the organisation would come down to practice and would just come up and kick Dan's foot. And Dan was only in his early 20s, so he didn't really want to answer back. He just kind of looked at him and thought, oh, that's a bit strange. And this guy came back a couple of days later, kicked his feet again, just sort of tapped his foot against, you know, foot against foot. And Dan didn't want to say anything. And then a few days later he'd come into the same, and Dan finally said, mate, you know, what's all this? He said, I just want to make sure your feet are still on the ground. So again, another story of stay humble. Yeah. Sort of three different stories. It's no surprise that high performers or the ancients really do it, because, you know, the real enemy of high performance, the real enemy in life, I think, is ego. And, you know, the sense of the me. Really, life lived well. And if you look at studies of there are many different pockets of villages and so on around the world where people live a long time, and they also tend to report high levels of happiness, the same places. So be happy and live a long time. And what are the components? Well, it's a good diet, it's lower body exercise, God comes into it often, a sense of community, and a sense of purpose, and a sense of service, a sense of contribution, and they're all kind of combined. So having a role, having something to give, will make us happy, make us live a long time. And of course, that's where we create value. Value comes from the value we create. If we can give a service, give of ourselves, and that is wanted and valued, people pay for that. So that's a living anyway. So that sense of contribution, and I've done a lot of work with the military, and I think there's a couple of really interesting lessons around kind of leadership within the military. And at Sandhurst Military Academy, when the officer cadets turn up, on their pillow is a book, and it's called Serve to Lead. Serve to Lead. And it's really about that leadership really is about being of service to those you lead. And I think leading a life is very much about being of service to those you share your life with, having an impact, Ubuntu, the ripples go outwards, transcending our own sense of our own self-interest and giving our gift to the world means that we tend to get everything we want and that we need. We'll be happy, we'll live a long life, we'll create value, all of that stuff we really want. The takers don't really last, and they don't really create value. So the more we can give in a way, the more we get. And that begins with a fundamental humility, I think. It's the precondition for that. Don't let yourself get in the way of being yourself.
Beautiful. James, thank you so much for your time today. We're very grateful, and I love that. Don't let yourself get in the way of being yourself. Thank you again for your time.
Total pleasure, Ray. Thanks very much for having me.
Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.